Hey guys, what's going on? Ghost Dragon 1182 here, back for another coffee talk, and in this one, we're going to talk about the Legend of Zelda franchise for a couple episodes. In these, I'm going to discuss the games that I played, not so much the entire series, because there's no point in talking about games that I never played. So, we're going to get right into it with the first game in the franchise, the Legend of Zelda, which released in 1986 for the Nintendo Entertainment System and the Famicom Disk System in Japan. Now, I didn't play The Legend of Zelda in 1986 when it was released because I would have been 3 years old. Now, I did get it in 1988, and up until that point, the games that I had played have been games like Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt, because that's what came with the console when I got it for Christmas the year prior. And as a kid, one of the things that I was always into was like this kind of like medieval settings and like knights and swords and shit like that. I always thought that stuff was cool, and to have a game like this, because I hadn't been exposed to things like Final Fantasy or anything like that at this point, but to have a game like this that was essentially, it had everything I liked. I mean, it had the kind of medieval setting, it had the monsters and stuff like that, and it was just like, well, I didn't say holy shit when I was 6, but I mean, that was like that kind of feeling. And learning years later, when I got older, that Miyamoto, when his idea for the game was basically he wanted that same sense of adventure in a video game that he got playing in the hills and the woods around his house growing up and things like that. And that game, at that time, that it accomplished that. It gave me, as a 6-year-old kid, it gave me this like sense of wonder and awe and exploration. And I didn't have a Nintendo Power that had an overworld map or anything like that, so there was a lot of digging around and trying to find things. And you go into what you think is a dungeon, and it's like the level 7 dungeon. You're like, oh, I'm not ready for that yet. I didn't know at the time you could do them out of order to an extent. But it was the first game I played where you could go anywhere, and there was just secrets everywhere. And it wasn't like, up until this point, I'd played Super Mario Brothers, which was basically, in a nutshell, for Super Mario Brothers, is you race from point A to point B before you run out of time, and you try not to die by falling down a pit or getting killed by an enemy in between there. This was, you had this vast expanse of an overworld, and then you had all these dungeons, and it was just mind-blowing to a kid. And I quickly became very enamored by the game, and it pulled me in, and I was going to find everything I could that was involved in trying to. And I remember being so frustrated when I found the cave that had the white sword, which would have been your first upgrade after the wooden sword, and I couldn't figure out why the guy wouldn't let me take it. And then I found a couple heart containers and went back, and he gave it to me, and I'm like, I didn't make the connection at the time, but it was just like, okay, maybe I had to beat a couple dungeons or something like that, and just being able to, having nothing really handed to you, and having to figure it out on your own, it was an adventure. I mean, it's an adventure game, and it felt like an adventure. Nothing was quite like that for me, and I guess I can't stress that enough. But the series eventually became a little bit more linear in focusing your attention on where you need to go. There's still some adventure elements and self-discovery aspects to it, but this game was the first one that really just had like, here's your map. If you see it, you can go to it. And trying to figure out things like, okay, how do I get this heart container that's floating out here on this little section of bridge on the water? And then you get the little step ladder thing, and you can cross those little gaps, and it's like, oh, okay, and things just start coming together. Now, years later, like, I don't know, maybe 89 or 90, possibly, might even have been later than that, because I think we'd moved by the time I got it, so it might have been like 91. I did get like some kind of strategy guide thing from Nintendo Power that had a shit ton of Nintendo game walkthroughs and stuff in it. And one of them was Legend of Zelda, and I was quite impressed that I, in that time span between when I had originally played the game and a few years later gotten this book that showed where everything was at. Because mind you, this was a time before you couldn't get on GameFAQs and stuff like that. But looking at this strategy guide, I had found everything, and it was... I couldn't even tell you how many hours I put into this game the first time I played it. I know it was quite a few, but it was just something that, and like, you know, my family, we didn't have, like, we weren't rich. I mean, we weren't poor either, but it wasn't like you got, as a kid, I got a new Nintendo game every month or anything like that. So I definitely got a lot of mileage out of this game because it was just one of those instances where I asked for it for Christmas. I got it. Or no, it wasn't even Christmas. It was like maybe my birthday or something. I forget the exact circumstances in which I got the game. I do remember it. It must not have been a holiday because I do remember now that I think about it that we ordered it from the Sears like catalog or something like that. And we had to go down to the Sears store and pick it up from this like kiosk. You like typed in your name and address, and then they brought your package out and stuff like that. So that's how that's going back. But this was a game that I got like I said, I got a lot of mileage out of it. I explored every nook and cranny. Finding the red candle was like a godsend in this game, so then I didn't have to, like, with the blue candle you could only like throw one fireball and then you had to leave the area and come back and throw another one. Once I got the red one, it made burning down trees so much more productive, because then I could just keep setting them on fire until I found the one that would lead me to something. And even that was like a complete accident the first time it happened. It was, I threw like a fireball from the candle. I mean, it's not really a fireball, but I used the candle, and the fire from it burned a tree and revealed a set of steps, and it's like, holy crap, there's hidden steps underneath stuff. And like the first time you touch the Armos Knights and they run away, when you activate them and they start moving around, there's one that in different areas you activate it and there's a hidden set of steps. And then you start thinking, okay, well, how much did I miss? I mean, this was a game that I got, oh, man, I know I at least got 6 months out of this game, from beginning to end, and trying to find everything without the aid of a walkthrough or anything like that. But that was just something that the pure exploration in figuring these things out on your own was just, and I think, and I'm not going to go into like a newer games are easier and shit like that type of rant, but I think that's what separates people like in my age bracket and people that are like late teens, early 20s now that play games. Like, we grew up with games that you had situations where the hints and everything like that weren't spelled out to you, and you had to try different things to figure out the solution to the problem at hand. Whereas now most games, they do kind of have a little bit of hand holding. They point you in the right direction eventually. Or you get the internet, you can get on GameFAQs or any number of websites to find out where to go and where all your little secret hidden locations are and stuff like that, where, you know, back in the late 80s, early 90s, we didn't quite have that stuff. And if you didn't have a Nintendo Power, you were really going to be in for the long haul in some of these games. Like, I really don't know how people figured out Castlevania 2 without a Nintendo Power, but that was just the nature of things back then. The games, while simpler, were at times more complex, and in their simplistic nature and the limitations of the technology at the time, they couldn't offer necessarily these in-depth hints and strategies as to what you needed to do. You know, now, one of the problems that a lot of people bring up with the Zelda franchise is, you know, there's this formula where you have these dungeons where you get the item in the dungeon, halfway through the dungeon, that's the item you have to use to kill the boss. And whereas in this game, you didn't have that. Probably one of the easiest ways to kill the Manhandla was with bombs. The Dodongo, you had to, you know, plop a bomb in front of him so he'd eat it, and That was the only way you could hurt him, which I know to like people nowadays that's like duh, but back then you didn't know that. You're like trying to hit him with the sword, and then if you came across the old man in the dungeon that was like the Dongo does not like smoke, you're like okay. There was some weird stuff due to translations and the differences in the platforms that this game was available on, like this on the Famicom Disk System. There was like a microphone thing on the controller that you could like whistle into it and stuff like that. So that kind of like that led to a lot of confusion with the Pole's voice, which in the manual it says it does not like loud noises. And in Japan, you could kill the Pole's voice by blowing or whistling into the microphone on the controller, and it would kill them. Whereas in America, you didn't have that on the Nintendo NES or the Nintendo Entertainment System controller, so that hint didn't make any sense, and you kind of just had to kill them the old-fashioned way. But while the game itself wasn't hard, you felt kind of like a sense of accomplishment when you figured out the different things, or you pieced together the hints and figured out what you needed to do or where you needed to go to find a certain object. And that's something that while Zelda games nowadays, they do have puzzles and things like that here and there, it's not quite, they've never quite captured the same spirit that was present in this original game. Now they say that's one of the things they're aiming for with the Zelda Wii U game or NX game, whatever it ends up coming out on, but you didn't. We'll have to wait and see. I personally welcome that, and I'm looking forward to that, but it's something that has been lacking in this game series for a while. And even like going back as to like what you just saw on the screen there with the gambling game, you had sometimes where if you burnt down a tree or blew up a rock or something, you could go in there and there'd be a moblin that would give you some rupees, or you'd have to pay the guy for the door repairs. I mean, you never knew if you were getting rewarded or if you just made a bad decision and we're gonna have to pay the consequences in some way, shape, or form. The game never really punished you severely to the point where it like discouraged you from trying out things and trying to blow up walls or anything like that, but could get a little frustrating if you found 3 secret areas and you had to pay for a guy's door 3 times in a row. But like I said, I mean, it wasn't discouraging. It was just like, well, maybe the next one will have something good in it, and that's maybe when you found a heart container or the old woman that sold the potion or things like that. And it was kind of one of those things. What led to the sense of wonder and the adventure in this game is you never knew what was around the next corner, the first time you played it at least, and you didn't know what to expect. But the tools were given to you to be able to adjust to the situation and make it through. Now, like most games from the NES era, the plot was fairly simple. It was your standard princess kidnapped by the evil bad guy, and you were the hero that had to go save her. There wasn't a whole lot of depth to it that we have, and that's one thing that the series has improved upon, is the lore has gotten deeper, if not a little convoluted at times and complicated, needlessly complicated possibly. But essentially, all you knew was you were a boy named Link. Princess Zelda was kidnapped by Ganon and his army. He had the Triforce of Power, and you had to find the 8 pieces of the Triforce of Wisdom, which Zelda had split up and sent out amongst the land, I guess you could say. We didn't have the Triforce of Courage or anything like that. There was no, like, chosen hero of the gods or anything. It was very simple and basic, which there's nothing wrong with that, especially for the time in which this game came out and that it was the first game in the series. Eventually, this is like the 4th game in the downfall timeline and things like that. I mean, it did eventually get very complicated, and I don't know, I wouldn't say it got retconned, but I mean, to the stories that we have now compared to the story that was present in this game, they are vastly different and have evolved over time. But for what it was when I played the game in 1988, it started in me a love for a franchise that, at the time I didn't know there was going to be as many games that would end it up. But I mean, this was a game that it grabbed me, it pulled me in, and it didn't let go. And I loved every minute that I spent playing this game. And I can't believe I've made it this far. I mean, one of the standout things about this game that I've completely forgot to mention thus far was the cartridge was gold. You know, that right there is just like, this is going to be awesome. Like, it caught your attention, and it just made you think this is going to be one of the greatest adventures I've ever played. And to me, at least, that's exactly what it was. It was a damn fine NES game. It was a very good, solid way to start a franchise. And it laid the foundation for one of my favorite narratives in a video game franchise to ever exist. There's nothing I can say about the original Legend of Zelda that is negative. Even now playing it, it doesn't feel dated to me. I don't know if it's because I'm used to it or because I had played it so much in the past, but it's a game that, thinking about it, I really can't find any faults with it. Not saying other people can't, but I myself cannot find anything that makes me think like, oh, that's bullshit, or oh, that could have been designed better, or that's unfair. It's a game that I don't want to say perfect, but as close to perfect as you could get in my mind. I'm really trying to think of something I could say bad about the game, and I really don't have anything. Like, especially off the top of my head, and even trying to think like, okay, was there anything in the game I really couldn't stand? And there's nothing that comes to my mind. They just did everything. Everything was done right, and I think once we get into Zelda 2 and start talking about it, I think that's how much of what The Legend of Zelda got right. That's why the things that Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link didn't get right, I think that's why those things stand out so much more. But that's a discussion for another time. If you have any way, shape, or form to play this game and you've never played it before, by all means play it. It's been released on numerous platforms. You know, like I said, originally it was on the NES. There's a Game Boy Advanced edition that came out for like NES Classics or something like that they called it. It's on the Virtual Console. There was you can find a disc at GameStop every once in a while that has like has Zelda 2, Ocarina of Time, and Majora's Mask. There's different ways you can get a hold of this game. And if you like classic games, or even if you don't and you just want to see what it's about, play this game. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people that haven't. There's probably more people that haven't played this game than you would imagine, but at the same time, there's a lot of people that have played this game. But if you haven't, like I said, try it. Give it a go. Understand it's 30 years old, though, and see what you think. Again, like I said, this started my love for one of my favorite franchises of all time. And while this isn't my favorite game in the franchise, it's up there. And it's one of I will say it's probably my favorite NES game of all time. But later on down the road, we'll discuss what my favorite of the top-down Zelda titles is, or Zelda titles in general. But until then, I want to thank you guys for watching. We'll see you in the next one. And until then, I'm going to go play some more Zelda, and maybe you do the same. Who knows? But have a good one, guys.